Hi everyone, my name is Josh Cunningham Marsh, the Program Manager for QG Media's CS4CA Canada Summit, taking place on the 2nd to 3rd of June this year at the Hudson in Calgary. Today I have the pleasure of being able to moderate a panel with some of our speakers at the event on Has OT security become too complex to be effective? This panel will give a taster of what will be discussed at the event, and I'm delighted to be joined by some of our speakers. They are Martin LeBudge, the Executive Director and CISO at Energear, Trent Johansson, the CISO at Phoenix Energy Services, Henry Bosch, an Associate Director of OT Systems and Security at EPCOR, and Prashant, a Senior Cybersecurity Advisor at Enbridge. Hi all, it's great to have you with us today. I'll dive straight into the questions now. So firstly, I wanted to start with a big picture question to set the scene. We hear about growing layers of tools, frameworks, and requirements in OT environments, but has OT security actually become too complex to be effective?
I don't know if it's become complex to be effective. I think the biggest thing is to get your fundamentals right first. I think the fundamentals of a baseline program is the most important part, and then worrying about the actual complexity of the program and making the program work for what your individual company or establishment requires.
I have to echo Trent there. I think that it's not necessarily that it's become more complex. I think there's a lot more noise and things that we have to cut through for our frontline staff to make sure that we're protecting the right things when they have to be protected.
I'll also echo Henry and Trent on that one. Basically, beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder. So it's about seeing how OT security is there in an organization. Complexity is something which humans sometimes bring into the equation. Other than that, fundamentals remain the same, the foundations remain the same. If we have the right cyber hygiene in our organizations, I think we'll be much ahead of the curve in terms of OT cybersecurity in the industry. Thank you.
The disadvantage of being the last one on such an amazing panel is that everything has been said before, but I'd like to echo on everything that's been said. I think the danger is that if we listen to all the noise that's around and we tend to get overwhelmed with everything that's been going on. So we might be our worst enemy, and we might be the ones making it more complex. So I think to what my colleagues have said, there's a lot of noise right now, but it's our responsibility to keep things as simple as possible and not complexify things by getting overwhelmed.
And I think a key theme of what's been mentioned so far is it is important to get the fundamentals right. But what should organizations really be prioritizing at the foundation of all their OT security strategies?
I think the number one thing in my mind, with the experience I have an asset visibility. Really knowing what you have out there. There's still a lot of corporations, companies that don't have asset visibility on their OT network. There's a fear of having monitoring on there. There's a fear of having active scanning. Talk at these conferences about this all the time. You don't know what you have until you actually have a scan. And then at what level do you stop? And I think that's the number one thing. It's just asset visibility.
Yeah, I'd have to agree that knowing what you have, and it's probably cliche, but for me, it's really that people and process piece. You need to understand where your people are. You need to make sure you're communicating with them what the actual risk is. What are you trying to protect? Some things you're not going to worry about. Some things you're going to have to, because you can't do everything. I think that's the key piece, is making sure everybody's in that same boat.
I certainly echo my previous panelists on this one, and I'll probably take Henry's comment a bit further around the people, process, and technology. So it's not PPT as in PowerPoint, but it's people, process, technology, and in that order. People and the skills are important. Their collaboration is important. Process is important in the OT space and the technology aspect. I'd also take it further in terms of having the organizations understand the fundamentals of OT from a North Star perspective. When we work on operational technology, we look at safety, security, reliability of operations, resiliency of operations. And that is key as you flip the equation when we call CIA to be AIC in the OT world, the availability, integrity, and confidentiality triad. So keeping that North Star in mind and making sure we follow the fundamentals as mentioned by my fellow panelists here would be pretty good.
Same here, visibility before sophistication. Make sure that you know your network, that you know what you have, you know your assets. And I maybe the one thing that I would add is clear ownership definition. So making sure that the owners are well identified and what are the owner's responsibility. Um, OT will think that it's an IT matter, IT will think it's an engineering matter, and the business will say, well, can't you guys speak the same language? So, making sure the roles and responsibilities are very well defined. There's a clear governance framework in place. I think it's another thing that we should, make sure that we prioritize.
And to ground what we've discussed so far in real world context, the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity continues to highlight that critical infrastructure organizations in Canada face persistent and evolving threats, particularly from ransomware and state aligned actors. So, with that in mind, my question comes in two parts. So, my first part is with those current and emerging threats driving risk in today's landscapes, what are those risks and how can we best have a strategy which helps us overcome them?
Well, that's a huge question to answer. I'm going to have a little bit here because I think really we're changing from nation state attacks going after IT to maybe starting specifically, we know recently, to moving into the OT networks. I mean, going back to Stuxnet, there's one before that going recently in the news with some of the attacks in Europe and all over. It just seems to be getting more and more nation state backed. Is it cause chaos? Is it cause fear? Is it espionage? Like, what is it actually doing? That's a whole other conversation we could have for hours. I just really think it's just changing that. It's moving from IT to OT, ransomware specifically, but not just ransomware. Like you said, you're sitting there with all these exploits on these systems that haven't been updated for a long time. And we're just behind the eight ball a little bit on the OT side.
Yeah, I think if we just look out east, right, we saw a big utility company in the last year get hit, and really tough for them. And I think looking at the risks there, as we have pressures to cut costs, sometimes we're thinking about, hey, consolidation, or we might decide we're going to merge some OT and IT, and we have to make sure that we're back to that asset identification, keeping those critical assets separate and secure, and we can't lose sight of doing that.
Again, concur with my fellow panelists on this one, just to add a couple of points in terms of this IT-OT convergence, which is being called out. It definitely increases the attack surface between the IT and the OT environments. In terms of some current threats, as mentioned by Trent, nation-state actors are pretty active in the industry. Ransomware hasn't gone anywhere. Some emerging threats, I would say, comes down to artificial intelligence being creeped into the OT environment, and that is increasing a lot of noise, but also a lot of attack surface in the environment. There's some practical use cases of people using AI and OT, and that definitely is a big risk. I would also add on cloud computing. Some organizations are looking at putting SCADA systems into the cloud and such, which definitely will have its own challenges as we have those integrations go forward. So cloud, AI, nation state actors, ransomware threats are not gone anywhere. They're definitely increasing in the OT space as we go along.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. We're seeing now even security vendors, proposing security tools in the cloud for OT environments, which is kind of counterintuitive when you think about it, because you want to keep as much as possible on-prem, and your OT network is on-prem. So it's and you don't want to open up too much your environment. So it's one of the new thing that we're seeing. AI is definitely, I think, and as much as we don't want to talk about it, and because everybody's talking about it, but AI, you can't ignore it. There's starting, the business is starting to put pressure on IT and OT networks to see, well, how can we automate more? How can we use the data? How can we use the OT data to improve our processes? And it's finding the balance to make sure that we keep the network secure, we keep the environment secure, and also educating the business that we can't be as fast as in the IT world. It's a slow process, and we need to be very careful to not disrupt, not be our own enemy, and disrupt our own operations. And geopolitical threats are rising. We're seeing it right now. It's been mentioned by my colleagues. We need to know our enemies and know what their intents are. Some of them only want to be, low profile in our networks. Others want to disrupt the networks. Others want to, just are in there for the money. So there's different objectives behind their attacks, and it's important to be aware of this and share information with other organizations.
And as Prashant and Martin mentioned, we're seeing a rapid adoption of technologies like AI and cloud computing across industrial environments, but also discussions surrounding quantum computing as well. And while Canadian surveys suggest organizations are increasingly putting more investment into these areas, there are still gaps in core capabilities like asset visibility and segmentation, which have been highlighted by all of our panelists today as important for security outcomes. So my next question is, are innovations like AI, quantum computing, and cloud computing creating noise, or are they helping us deliver meaningful security outcomes?
As Prashant said earlier, there's a lot of hype around AI and cloud right now. Like you said, some of the vendors are trying to push towards cloud. And for me, there's always a risk with it. I said, but the one thing I want to look at it when I look at AI is like to use AI on the detection side of it is it's an amplifier. It's not a control. It's not going to stop bad architecture. It's not going to stop bad design. Yeah, you can respond a little quicker, but if you don't have, as you said earlier, Josh, the network segmentation, the proper securities in place on that, understanding what you actually have, again, with the asset visibility side of it, it's going to help you respond a little quicker potentially, but it's not going to stop. It's not the solution to good architecture, good foundational design.
Yeah, totally fair, Trent. And I think if we think of all these different things, there are ways that we can communicate with our senior leadership to say, here are some of the emerging threats, things that are coming, and allows us a way to actually invest in some of those core principles. I think AI, like if I look at the OT space and think about it historically, engineers have always found really cool ways to get stuff done. And I think that that's also happening inside of the OT space. If I look at EPCOR, one of the cool things we're doing is we're using AI to run our hydrogen sulfide scrubbers at our wastewater treatment plant at Edmonton. It's saving us money. The efficiency is higher than humans can do it. So there are really cool use cases. But you got to have guardrails, you got to have some governance, and we need to make sure that we're putting proper security in. One thing that I heard recently at a conference is somebody from a mining organization on their security team built a local large language model and actually was ingesting logs from their SIMs and different tool sets and then using it and agents to actually do their day-to-day security tasks. So there's noise, but I think with the right people, with the right type of here's what I want, exactly what I want, we can get a lot of cool stuff done with AI.
I always subscribe to the thought that technology is a good slave but a bad master. And when I see AI, cloud computing, or quantum computing, they're basically technologies. They're capabilities in the hand of mankind. And there is a coin which always has two sides, the good and the bad. The good side, as mentioned in the question here, is around meaningful security outcomes. Yes, they do provide, a right range of or a long range of options in terms of how we can handle security. For example, mentioned by my fellow panelists, AI could be used pretty fast in detection engineering, a lot of things around security operations and incident response, etc. Now, cloud computing for the same part can be also used to cut costs and also bring some of the security into the cloud, but still manage it safely and securely with the right guardrails. Quantum computing is talk of the town. It has its power, but it also has its risks. Again, it is still a bit too early to comment a lot on some of those, but cryptographic material which we can't break right now could be broken with quantum computing down the road. So in a nutshell, these are good innovations, but as I said, technology always comes and has a good and a bad to it. They will have their issues. AI, as mentioned by Henry, there's a lot of attack surface which AI is bringing into the OT environment. There's some very powerful use cases the engineering teams are using, but that they at the same time, imagine for a second if AI starts using your your control panels, or goes and starts using your PLCs and RTUs, and then it goes beyond certain set points and creates some safety conditions. So there has to be real guardrails in place and figuring out how we can use it safely. Currently, I think AI is being used mostly on predictive intelligence, getting some data from the field, doing some analysis, helping out folks on the ground. But there are some good use cases there.
I totally agree with all of my colleagues. AI is a tool. It's a tool out of many tools that we have. It's a technology. It's and it serves a purpose, and it has to be used for a specific purpose, a clear purpose. You can't just use it and just like a toy. It's not a toy. It's a tool that you use to perform your job. I think if that there's been a lot of hype on productivity and user doing their own agents and people doing their own thing with AI. And I think now the industry seeing that you need to plan how you integrate AI into your operation. You can't just it's not just a license that you activate in your tenant. It's something that needs to be planned. It's something that you need to make sure that it brings value, real value to the organization. And it will be the same for OT in the next few years. There are some use cases actually that, like Henry said, that are very interesting in OT. Right now, what we're doing here at Energir is, taking the data out and, analyzing the data to predict, predict with the weather that's coming, how much gas we need to buy. And so these are things that we're able to do right now. I don't see automating gas distribution and having agents making decisions right now into the OT network. But there are things that, AI can provide value to the business and make sure, help us, cut down the cost and being more precise on our gas acquisition. And on the security side, one of the use cases we're looking at right now with the Mitos project is how can we leverage AI to have better vulnerability management and making sure that because people are saying, oh, we're going to cut down the patching cycle. Eventually you're going to have to patch on a 24/7 basis if you look at it that way. So it's how we're going to be able to prioritize and really identify the real vulnerabilities that we need to fix. And I think AI will be a part of the solution. So it's the noise. It's been, to me, I think the noise has been, there was a lot of noise. I think now the noise is slowly, going down, and now we're seeing, the real work that needs to be done to integrate and use AI in our organizations.
And with this all in mind, one of my key takeaways from what's been discussed is the importance of guardrails and governance. So, how can organizations simplify governance structures and processes without weakening control or oversight?
Well, that's a really another one of these conversations we could do an entire seminar on. But I think the biggest thing is the overcomplication side of it. You got too many policies, too many practices, too many frameworks. What are you using on your OT system for a framework? Are you using NIST? Are you going to follow an ISA standard? Or are you going to follow that? And how do you tie that into your IT network? And I think you've got competing policies and standards sometimes, and you have to do a fit for purpose program for OT. Overarching program, yes. Policies from the directors down, absolutely. But sometimes you have to take that little piece out in the corner that's OT specific. These are the things that you can and cannot do. IT, here's your program. OT, here's your specific ones. And it might only be 2 or 3 procedures, could be standards. It really depends. But just overcomplicating things, I think, sometimes makes it really difficult to move forward on it.
100%. We need to really think about keeping it simple. And that probably starts with figuring out what type of reporting do you need to give to your board level. And then you can work backwards. They are at a board level from a CFO perspective. These are people who are masters at risk management. They have a lot to teach us as far as coordinating and quantifying. And I think if we can build into that, we can have simple processes that really look at risk-based analysis on our assets, with our people, and on our processes. So we can say, what is it we have to do? What is it we don't have to do? We talked about it already, but I think realistically, Martin you touched on something earlier on assets, identifying who the owners are. And I think with that, it's also key to understand who the owner of the cyber risk is. So in a lot of organizations, the cyber risk sits with the cyber guy. But is that real? I think if the owner of a plant is the one that's controlling the budget for the upgrades, they should be owning the cyber risk for those devices. And that's something that as organizations we have to start to move better towards and make sure that there's sign off on that risk. So our jobs as cyber folks is to identify it, mitigate where we can, but really just present the overall risk so it can be signed off or accepted.
I'll certainly take it further. Again, a man of simple words around, there's always beauty in simplicity and the KISS principle. Keep it so simple or keep it simple, stupid, in terms of making sure that we reduce our burden of governance. Usually it comes down to from an IT and OT divide. We have IT people with their own policies, cybersecurity policies, trying to inject into the OT space, and engineers and OT folks may not be able to understand it and they want to run their own. So I would suggest from a governance standpoint to create a bit of a committee of IT OT folks who can meet frequently, figure out how they can work together, make the governance principles simple for them to move. Also bring in a bit of more agile methodology in the environment in terms of, rinse and repeat, get feedback, fail fast as you go along, but experiment and keep it simple and practical to the ground level. If we are in the operational technology space, I think that's the bread and butter of the organization. IT is there to support the OT environments. That's actually the business, and we need to figure out how to help them be successful rather than being a bit of a roadblocker to their objectives. So it has to be a collaborative effort. There's no one piece fits all solution here, but again, creating a committee, figuring out simplified solutions, standards, policies. I concur with around who owns the risk and the risk management practices coming from top down, but also a bottom up approach where you listen to your field personnel. I mean, put your hard hat on, put your PPE on, go listen to them, understand how their challenges are there. Just listening to them will create those bridges, will create those friendships, which will go a long way in helping you, fix a problem as a cyber leader in the organization and be very effective in creating the right governing policies for us.
Really, Prashant, you're taking the words out of my mouth on this one. It's really, I think, that people relationships are the number one thing that you need to build. You can build a committee, you can have a policy, you can have standards, but if people don't understand each other, it's not going to work. So it's really putting your hat on, like you said, and going out in the field and looking at how people work, looking at the challenges they face, seeing their reality, seeing that the decisions that you're making, what kind of impact does it have on their day-to-day work, and just the fact that you're doing that and spending the time to listening to them, you're building that trust, you're building that relationship, and telling them that you're there to support and making sure that their operation will be going on. I think the biggest mistakes we can make as cybersecurity people is going into OT and telling them, "Here's how it's going to work." It's a recipe for failure. It's the opposite. It's their world, it's their environment, it's the core of the organization. You're there to support them. You're there to help them reduce the risk, and you're there to educate them on cyber risk. But in the end, they're the owner of the environment, and technically they should be also the owner of the risk. So, but that's another topic. We'll have a different panel on this one.
And thank you all for your answers. And finally, to bring everything together in a few sentences, what practical steps can teams take to cut through the complexity and refocus on the basics that really matter?
One of the things is just to focus back on what Martin just said is get involvement and get buy-in from those guys in the field. I was one of those guys, and I used to push back on IT all the time. And then you started sitting, as everyone has said, talking to understand both sides. What are the requirements for both sides? What's the requirements for the business to keep online? I think that's important, getting buy-in from the field. Now, to answer this question, I think the thing is just get it down to few priorities. What are your priorities? Again, go back to know your assets, simple network segregation, things like that. Control the remote access. We haven't even touched on that in this panel yet. It's a huge risk. Who's in your systems? What do they have access for? Third-party companies coming in for remote monitoring of say, a gas turbine, all of that. And then ensure what you can recover. Like, do you have backups? Have you tested your backups? And then monitor what really matters. Don't try and boil the ocean and understand every single thing going on in your network. Make it simple, make it achievable. And I think at the end of the day, it's a program. Once you start it, it's a program. So you fail this year, you figure out where you have, and you figure out what gaps you need to close next year. It's a continuous life cycle. It's never changing.
Yeah, great points, Trent. Building on that people part of the last question, the field folks, those engineers, they're excited to tell you about their work. They're proud of what they do. So you've got to sit down and engage with them. So bang on, Prashant. I'm glad you raised that. I think we all like sometimes the shiny tools in cybersecurity. We like seeing all the dashboards and all the information from everything, but that's not necessarily going to help us a whole lot. And Trent hit some big basics there. And one that I'd like to add is thinking about your devices that are out there. Once you've identified the ones you care about, have you turned off all the protocols and all the options that aren't needed for that device's task? Minimize the noise coming out of it. That's going to go a long way. So when you're doing an engineering package, it's not just how it's all wired together, but it's what's the configuration and the setup of that device. Over time, you're going to get way less noise and your environment will be easier to defend because you're going to go, oh, this is talking to this and that's allowed. It's talking to something else, not allowed. And you'll actually know what it means.
Definitely very good answers from my fellow panelists. I also subscribe to the thought and the methodology of the SANS basic 5 ICS controls, and I can call them out in this panel here. ICS incident response plan, defensible architecture, ICS network visibility and monitoring, secure remote access, and risk-based vulnerability management. Just a couple of sentences on each, right? You need to figure out an incident response plan specific to your ICS environments. Your IT incident response plans may not work in those environments, given the fact that availability, integrity, and confidentiality is important in that order. And so making sure that that is catered to through those incident response plans. Defensible architecture, shift left, figure out if you can build security architecture right in the design of your projects, programs, your OT systems, rather than bolting them on later on. Because then that creates a fundamental risk when you shift right in terms of security, in terms of its design. And we can go on around Purdue model, etc. But there are various ways you can handle that. Network visibility, as mentioned by Trent and my fellow panelists and Henry as well, visibility and monitoring. You can't fix what you don't know. So, you got to have a good asset inventory, understand where those assets are, what are their patch levels, operating system, IP addresses, firmware, where they are, what is their role being played, are they critical to the operations on site or to your organization, and understanding that network visibility component. Secure remote access is another big one. Third-party vendors, contractors, they go into your organization, and they can sometimes have unfettered access at a privileged level and could create issues. Even if you are a castle, those inroads coming in from those third-party vendors could create the attack surface and the risk around it. So making sure those remote accesses are maintained, managed properly, you have visibility, encryption in place, etc. Risk-based vulnerability management. I can't talk enough about it. In the IT environment, we continue to patch. Patch Tuesdays come. People look at it. Mythos has come out in AI, finding all the zero-day vulnerabilities. People are talking about patching now much more frequently than what they're doing. That probably wouldn't work in the OT environment. You would have to be very careful in what you patch in your OT assets. You got to be risk-based around it. Sometimes an asset could have compensating controls around it. You may not need to fix the vulnerability itself. Figure out if you can segment the asset, create a network segmentation or a network security control around the asset. So, and fix and patch where you need to, where you have to. Talk to your engineers, understand the consequences of it. You don't want to shoot yourself into the foot by patching and bringing down your system, which otherwise cyber actors would like to do by exploiting the vulnerability. So it's quite a bit of an oxymoron. You're creating a shutdown scenario. What could be done by the actors who would exploit a vulnerability? So just have to be very careful on those acronyms there. So yeah, those 5 controls what I would subscribe to and share in this panel.
keep it simple. I think we like as we mentioned before, we can be our worst enemy. So let's keep it simple. There are basic things that you just mentioned with the SANS controls. Those are basic things, and make sure that you have the basic things done before trying anything fancy. And there will be pressure from management. There will be pressure from the business, maybe to get new stuff in because they saw something at a conference where that specific company in the US or in Europe did something, and we should do the same thing. Make sure that you educate people on, yes, sounds cool, but there are risks, and we're not in a position right now to do that new thing. We need to be sure that the basics are covered, the bases are covered. One thing I often say is, and we all say it, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So be prepared, have a response plan, and test that plan. It's one thing to have it written down, but if you never tested it with the OT people, because we're very good at testing it with the IT folks, and we're very good, we have this nice IT response plan and IT cybersecurity response plan, and we test it with all of our people in IT. But if you never test it and you never have a simulation on with OT people, once the day you'll need to activate it, we're all going to be like deers on the highway looking at each other and not knowing what to do. So make sure that you test that plan once in a while.
And Trent, Henry, Prashant, Martin, thank you for your time today. It's been great to hear your input on our panel on Has OT Security Become Too Complex to Be Effective? I know each of you have presentations at the event as well, which touch on some of the issues discussed today, and I can't wait to see them in Calgary in early June. And I can't wait also to discuss the topics from today's panel in further depth too.
Yeah, thanks to everybody. I appreciate this. There's a lot of knowledge on this panel and a lot of years of experience, judging by our hair color and the faces that we have. And I think that experience is important, that we actually use it and just help our people that are doing these jobs.
Yeah, thanks to all of you as well. That's awesome. It's okay. It's the wisdom coming out. That's what somebody told me once. So it's all good. Thank you so much, everybody.
I can only say I'm standing on the shoulders of giants here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. On my side, I lost all of my wisdom, I think, a few years back. So it's starting to grow here, but I lost. Maybe I partied too much in my 20s. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you in Calgary in a few weeks.
And thank you, the audience, for taking time out of your day for this taster of the upcoming CS4CA Canada event in Calgary on the 2nd to 3rd of June this year. I am Josh Cunningham Marsh, the Program Manager for CS4CA Canada. I'm looking forward to the actual event, and I do hope you'll join us. To find out more, please do click on the link below.